My hands remember the grease better than they remember the faces of the men I killed. It is a strange thing, what the mind chooses to keep and what it allows to rot. I can close my eyes now, 80 years later, and still feel the viscosity of the oil between my thumb and forefinger, the heavy, coarse lubricant of a tractor transmission in Gorky, and the thinner, sharper-smelling fluid that bled from the WW2 engine of my fighter. They say memory is a library, but mine is a workshop, cluttered and smelling of iron and damp earth. I'm not sure if it was truly that cold on the morning of July 5th, 1943, or if the chill is just the ghost of old age settling in my marrow. But I remember shivering, not from the temperature but from the silence. It was never the flying that frightened me. It was the machine itself. Before the war, back in the tractor station in Gorky, a machine was an honest thing. If a cylinder misfired, you stripped it down, you honed the bore, you replaced the ring. It was a negotiation between metal and logic. You could stop the engine. You could walk away and drink tea while the manifold cooled. But sitting in the cockpit of that La 5 FN, waiting for the signal flare, there was no walking away. The aircraft was a wooden coffin wrapped in birch veneer and doped fabric, strapped to a radial engine that screamed with enough horsepower to tear itself apart if you looked at it wrong. I sat on the parachute pack, the straps digging into my thighs, and ran my gloved hands over the instrument panel. The cockpit was tight, smelling of high-octane fuel, sweat, and the sharp chemical tang of the exhaust. Outside, the Voronezh front was waking up. I could hear the muffled clanking of wrenches against cowl flaps, the low, anxious murmur of the mechanics. They were good boys, most of them. Kids, really. But they were tired. I had watched them the night before, working by the light of hooded lanterns, their eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking from fatigue and caffeine. Had they tightened the mounting bolts on the magneto? Had they checked the tension on the rudder cables, or had they just assumed it was fine because they wanted to sleep? That was the terror. Not the German aces in their Messerschmitts, but the loose nut, the hairline fracture in a fuel line, the single speck of grit in the carburetor. I was a mechanic before I was a pilot. I knew exactly how fragile these beasts were. I knew that a fighter plane is just a collection of thousands of parts flying in close formation, all of them trying to fail simultaneously. Dmitri, a voice called out. It was breathless, distorted by the wind. I didn't turn my head. I was listening to the idle of my engine. The propeller was a blur in front of me, chopping the heavy morning mist. Dmitri, look alive. I ignored him. I was listening for the ghost. Every engine has a rhythm, a heartbeat. The WW2 82 was a brute, a 14-cylinder radial that shook the airframe like a wet dog. But underneath the roar, I thought I heard it, a microscopic hesitation in the number 3 cylinder. A stutter, a hiccup. Was it real? Or was it just my own pulse hammering against my eardrums? The tachometer needle held steady, vibrating slightly, but the needle doesn't tell you everything. The needle doesn't tell you if a valve spring is about to snap. My left hand gripped the throttle quadrant, the leather of my glove slick against the metal. I wanted to cut the engine. I wanted to climb out, open the cowling, and put my hands on the cylinder head. I wanted to verify the valve clearance with a feeler gauge. I wanted the logic of the workshop. But this was not Gorky. This was the Kursk salient, and the horizon was already flashing with the dull, rhythmic strobing of artillery. The doubt paralyzed me. It sat in my chest, heavier than the armored glass behind my head. If I take off and the engine fails on the climb, I crash into the trees. If it fails in a dogfight, I am a sitting duck. I looked at the oil pressure gauge again. Green arc. But was the sensor reading true? Then the sky tore open. A red flare arced up from the command bunker, a bleeding wound against the gray dawn. It hung there for a second, illuminating the mud of the airfield, the hunched shapes of the mechanics running clear of the props. The signal, the decision was taken from me. The squadron was moving. To my right, the roar of a dozen other engines rose to a deafening crescendo, a physical wall of sound that vibrated through the seat and into my spine. I saw the plane next to me lurch forward, mud spraying from its wheels. My hand, acting on instinct rather than will, shoved the throttle forward. The engine responded with a snarl, the torque trying to twist the entire airframe to the left. I kicked the rudder pedal, correcting the drift, and the fear of the machine failing was buried under the necessity of making it fly. I was no longer a man wondering about a valve spring. I was the pilot of White 23, and we were rolling. The tail lifted. The rumbling of the wheels on the rough earth smoothed out, replaced by the clean, fluid sensation of flight. I retracted the gear. The thud of the wheels locking into the fuselage was the sound of a door closing. The ordinary world of mud and wrenches was gone. We climbed. As we ascended through 2,000 meters, the vibration of the engine changed. It settled. That phantom stutter I thought I heard on the ground vanished, replaced by a steady, powerful thrumming that resonated in the bones of my forearms. This is where the transition happened. It always happened here in the climb. The mechanic in me receded, and the pilot took over. But it was more than that. I stopped fighting the machine and started listening to it, not with suspicion, but with partnership. I could feel the airflow over the ailerons through the stick. I could sense the mixture richness by the temperature of the exhaust gas. I became part of the linkage. We punched through a layer of broken stratus clouds and emerged into the blinding morning sun. And then I saw hell. They call it the Battle of Kursk now. Historians draw arrows on maps, neat red and blue lines. But up there it was not a map. It was a swarm of angry insects, a chaotic, three-dimensional riot of metal and fire. The scale of it stole the breath from my lungs. The sky was not empty. It was crowded. Hundreds of aircraft, ours, theirs, were woven into a frantic tapestry of contrails and black smoke. Below us, the earth was burning. The steppe was hidden under a blanket of dust and smoke from thousands of tanks, a churning gray sea that swallowed the horizon. Bandits 12 o'clock high, the radio crackled, the voice screeching. Stripped of humanity by the static. I looked up. Tiny black dots were diving out of the sun. Messerschmitt. They looked like hawks folding their wings. The formation shattered. The rigid discipline of the climb evaporated into a frantic scramble for survival. I banked hard left, the G-force pushing me down into the seat, gray vision creeping in at the edges of my sight. The world tilted. A BF-109 flashed past my canopy, so close I could see the rivets on its yellow nose. The blur of its prop. It was there and then it was gone, leaving only the turbulence of its wake to buffet my wings. I leveled out, my heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with the engine. Tracers drifted past my left wing, lazy. Glowing orbs that looked harmless until you realized they were traveling at supersonic speeds. I pulled the stick back, climbing, trading speed for altitude. To my right, a Yak-11 of ours caught a burst of cannon fire. There was no sound of the impact over the roar of my own engine, just a visual dismantling. The wing sheared off at the root. The fuselage spun wildly, vomiting flame and debris. It didn't look like a machine anymore. It looked like a crushed toy. I waited for a parachute. There was none. The burning wreckage tumbled down into the gray soup of the tank battle below. Stay with me, too. Stay with me, it was my flight letter. I couldn't see him. The sky was a kaleidoscope of spinning horizons and flashing metal. I was breathing in short, sharp gasps, the oxygen mask clammy against my face. I spotted him. He was engaging a Heinkel bomber, diving on its tail. But he wasn't alone. 2 German fighters were slotting in behind him, predators locking onto prey. They were hungry, and he was blind to them. Break right. Break right, I screamed into the mask, but the radio was awash of static and Russian curses. He didn't hear me. I didn't think. The mechanic who worried about stress fractures was gone. I rolled the La-5 inverted and pulled, diving into the fight. I needed speed. I needed to intercept them before they tore my later apart. I slammed the throttle past the gate into the emergency power setting. The engine howled a desperate, high-pitched wail as the supercharger kicked into high gear. The airframe shuddered violently, protesting the dive speed. I was closing the distance. The reticle of my gun sight danced over the trailing Messerschmitt. I could see the exhaust plumes from his engine. closer, closer, and then the world broke. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow, a concussive sledgehammer strike that came from inside the cowling. The aircraft bucked violently, slamming my helmet against the canopy glass. The smooth, powerful roar of the SH-Vetsov disintegrated into a grinding, metallic cacophony, metal chewing on metal. My stomach dropped. I glanced at the panel. The instrument glass was cracked from the vibration. The oil pressure needle, the one I had prayed over on the ground, collapsed to zero. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to seep into the cockpit. The engine was dying, tearing itself apart piston by piston, and I was 3,000 meters above the burning step, diving straight into the inferno. The fear I had felt on the ground hadn't been a ghost. It had been a prophecy. The vibration rattled my teeth. My hands, usually so steady with a wrench, fought the stick as if wrestling a living thing in its death throes. Every instinct I possessed, every hour spent bent over an open cowling in the Gorky winters, screamed one command. Shut it down, feather the prop, glide. To run an engine with zero oil pressure is murder. It is suicide. I hauled the stick back, trading airspeed for altitude, desperate to put distance between myself and the ground. The nose rose sluggishly. I was leaving the fight. I had to. A dead pilot saves no one. Then I saw it. Below me, a shadow against the burning wheat. A Ju-87 Stuka, its fixed landing gear like the talons of a hawk, rolling over into a dive. It was ignoring the dogfight, focused entirely on the steel beasts crawling through the mud of Prokhorovka. My tanks, my countrymen. I looked at my temperature gauge. The needle was buried in the red. The engine block was melting. If I turned back, the stress would seize the pistons instantly. I would fall like a stone. I did not think. I did not calculate. I kicked the rudder hard. The Lavachkin groaned, a sound of tearing metal. But it turned. I pushed the nose down one last time. The Stuka filled my forward view, ugly and angular. My engine was not just failing now. It was hammering itself to pieces, a chaotic rhythm of destruction. I could smell it, the sharp, stinging scent of vaporized metal and cooking rubber. The cockpit was an oven. I managed the throttle with a surgeon's touch, coaxing one last breath from the dying lungs of the machine. Come on, just a little more. Hold together. The German grew larger. The cross on his fuselage was a black scar against the pale metal. My finger tightened on the trigger. Then, darkness, a hot black sludge erupted from the cowling, coating the windscreen in an instant. A ruptured oil line. I was blind. I was traveling 500 kilometers an hour, diving at the ground, with a seizing engine and no eyes. I did not pull up. I did not wipe the glass. I kept the stick frozen, holding the image of the Stuka that burned in my mind's eye, the ghost of where he had been a fraction of a second ago. I squeezed the trigger. The cannons hammered, shaking the airframe so violently I thought the wings would shear off. I fired until the guns clicked dry. I waited for the impact. I waited to die. But the impact never came. Through the oil-smeared side panel, a flash of orange. The Stuka was tumbling, a broken toy, missing a wing. It spiraled down into the smoke. Then silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. The propeller had stopped. The engine had welded itself into a solid block of useless iron. I was no longer a pilot. I was falling in a heavy wooden coffin. The mechanic in me woke up. I was not flying. I was managing energy. Altitude is life. Speed is life. I had very little of either. The steppe rushed up to meet me, a blur of brown and gray. I spotted a strip of flat earth between two burning T-34s. It would have to do. I dropped the flaps. The drag hit me like a wall. The ground was too fast, too close. I braced my arms against the panel. The earth slammed into us. The world spun sky. Dirt fire sky. Metal screamed as the undercarriage collapsed. We slid, tearing a gouge in the Russian soil, until we hit a berm and stopped. I sat there for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of cooling metal. The smell of the dead engine was overwhelming. a stench of scorched iron that I can still taste on the back of my tongue. I crawled out of the cockpit, my flight suit soaked in sweat and oil. I ran my hand over the cowling. It was hot enough to burn skin. I had killed it. I had forced it to work until its heart burst. I look at my hands now. They are old. The grease settled into the lines of my palms decades ago and never really left. I am in my garage, surrounded by parts. Carburetors, camshafts, pistons. I fix them. I make them run. But I do not trust them. Before the war, I thought a machine was a perfect thing. If you traded it right, it rewarded you. That is a lie. A machine is just metal waiting to fail. It is a promise waiting to be broken. I pick up a piston from the bench. It is pitted, scarred. People ask me about the heroism. They ask about the medals. I tell them about the noise. The sound of something you love destroying itself because you asked it to. A machine will always tell you the truth. It will groan. It will scream. It tells you when it is about to die. The terror is not in the breaking. The terror is in not listening. In war, you must listen. You must fly into the noise. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.